So, the year after I graduated from undergrad, I remember about 11 of my friends all got married. And those of you who have been to Adventist universities, you know this is kind of maybe part of the goal that our parents have maybe when they send us to Adventist universities. You know, of course, they want us to get an education that's excellent, that has a high standard, that leads us to a beautiful career. But there's also that little secret little agenda, yes, surely, agenda, where our parents are like, hey, I kind of want to put you in an environment where maybe you could marry someone who has similar values to you. And that definitely happened to me when I was at Walwell. I remember the summer after I graduated, 11, as I said, of my friends, including myself, all got married in that year, which was a wild time trying to make it to all those weddings, which is expensive, by the way. What are we doing all getting married after undergrad where nobody has money? And we can't. It's like, and some people, I get invitations, I got to save the date. Hey, come to my wedding in Bali. I'm like, bro, I'm 22. I don't have money to go to Bali. What are you talking about? I don't have the job yet. But I remember getting a lot of these little things in the mail called save the dates. And I brought some with me to show you guys. I have a massive collection of save the dates because of this. I have a whole bunch. This one's from my friend Ben and Casey. Very beautiful. Look at this ribbon. And they even got a little bit of, they got wax with a little signet in there. Beautiful. My friends Taylor and Joel, they have another one. Very similar style. Ooh, look how classy that is. I saw this and I was like, gee, I'm glad this one's not in Bali. Your boy could not afford that. I got a whole bunch. I have ones from our dear friends, Kobe and Taylor, who are getting married in November. How exciting. Save the dates come in all different shapes and sizes. But as I was looking at these this week, I stumbled across my collection, because I have a ton, and I was just thinking, man, there's something about an invitation. Just look at it, isn't it nice? There's something about receiving this tiny piece of paper, and it's got this little gold signet on it, and like someone took the care and the time to make it look stunning, and then they thought of you, and you were on a list, and as they were in their home thinking, man, who should we invite to our party? We want to celebrate, and who do we want to be there? They thought of you. And then they crafted this, and they put it in the mail, and they sent it to you, and you open it, and you're like, oh, snap, look at this. I was actually thought of. That there was someone on the other end who thought of me, and they wanted me to be there. I love an invitation. It's kind of heartwarming. It's kind of heartwarming, knowing that you are invited. And that's what I want to talk about today for just a few minutes, the idea of being invited. Not only being invited ourselves, but the idea of extending an invitation. So let's rock and roll. The past few weeks, I have been speaking all about one of our core values here at Elevate, which is the concept of making room. The concept of making room. First week, we talked about how do we make room for Jesus? How does that happen? We talked about the cost of discipleship. Jesus asks a lot of us, and specifically our whole life, he asks of us. He says, hey, come and follow me. And then week 2, we talked about, man, how do we make room for one another? This is the call to elevate the other over the self, not seeking our own benefit like Desmond Doss. He did the opposite. He sought to elevate the other, to save without any regard for reward to himself. We talked about that. And so this week I want to talk about, man, how do we make room for one more? How do we extend beyond this space and then go out and make a little bit more room in the world? So that's what we're going to do. If you've been following along or not, that's okay. Just a quick recap to get you up to speed. We've been dwelling in Luke chapter 14. This is the space where Jesus, he's been telling a few parables. We catch Jesus in this moment where he's kind of becoming a celebrity. He's been gaining more and more notoriety, and he has massive crowds of people following him. And he ends up at the home of a prominent Pharisee, and they end up in this discourse back and forth, and he ends up telling a couple parables. We talked about the first one last week, and this one, we enter the second one, the parable of the wedding feast found in Luke chapter 14, verse 15. We're going to dive right in. I'm going to read the whole text. It's a kind of a big block of text, but we're going to speed through. It goes like this. When one of those who had reclined at table with him heard all these things, right, the things he's been talking about, he just told the other parable we talked about when he says, hey, when you throw a party, do not invite your close friends, right? He says, go out and invite those who you don't know. Really, really crazy. It says, when one of those who reclined at the table with him heard these things, he said to him, "Blessed is everyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God." But Jesus said to him, "A man once gave a great banquet and invited many. And at the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to say to those who had been invited, 'Come, for everything is now ready.' But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said to him, 'I have bought a field, and I must go out and see it. Please have me excused.' Another one said, 'I've bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I go to examine them. Please have me excused.' And another said, 'I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come.' So the servant came and reported these things to the master. Then the master of the house became angry and said to his servant, 'Go out quickly to the streets and lanes of the city and bring in the poor and the crippled, the blind, the lame.' And the servant said, 'Sir, what you've commanded has been done, and still there is room.' And the master said to the servant, 'Go out to the highways and hedges then, and compel people to come in, that my house may be filled.'" So, the first thing that I have for you is we need to dwell on verse 15 just for a second here. Because Jesus, right, he's in this moment, and he's just told this parable. And so in response, one of the people there, presumably a Pharisee, perhaps one of the religious leaders, he's at the home of a prominent Pharisee, so there's a good chance, maybe not, but there's a good chance that other prominent religious leaders would be there. He says, "Well, blessed is everyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God." It's kind of a tiny little verse we may skip over. It seems insignificant, but if we pause, there's something going on here. It seems a little random, but it's almost as if this guy is saying, well, man, won't that be great one day, right? Jesus has just finished telling this parable about this wedding banquet where everyone is invited, or this great feast where everybody is invited. And the guy says, well, that's going to be great one day in heaven when we get there. Won't that be fantastic at the table of God one day? And Jesus, in response, he starts telling a second parable, this wedding banquet. But Jesus seems to push back a little bit against this exclamation, right? His parables almost seems to be an attempt to sort of say, maybe not. Maybe it's not one day. And I don't know about you, sometimes when I read the scriptures and I look at, the Pharisees, people like that, they're often the villains in the story. They're often villainized, right, in sermons, whatever it is. They're often the villains, quote unquote, so to speak, in the story, even though to God, they're not. He had love for each and every one. But often we, just by default, kind of villainize them a little bit. But we're more like the Pharisees, I think, than we care to admit sometimes, right? The Jewish people were an eschatological movement, right? The Jewish people, they were a specific people called by God for a specific task, and they had an eschatological lens to their whole identity, right? They were constantly looking forward when Messiah comes one day. And beyond that, they were looking forward to when the day of the Lord comes one day. One day God will bring justice. He will right all wrongs, right? They're looking forward. They're an eschatological movement. Man, your boy's struggling with the word eschatological. It's a bit of a tongue twister. But right, we're a little bit more like the Jewish people than perhaps we care to admit. They were constantly looking ahead. One day Messiah will come. One day. One day. One day the day of the Lord will find us and we will be healed. But Jesus has a different agenda. Jesus comes to announce that the kingdom of heaven is here and now. It's not someday far off in the distance, in the clouds, where we're naked babies playing harps somewhere. He says, the kingdom's now, like it's here, it's among you, it's arrived. It's me, I'm here, and I brought the kingdom. And so Jesus, he begins this parable to help us see, I think, what is a bit of a difficult truth for the Jewish people and for us. Because Seventh-day Adventists, right, it's in our name. We believe in the Advent. We are an eschatological movement ourselves. We've constantly been looking forward since the very beginning. A beautiful thing, a beautiful truth. We believe Jesus is coming again soon. That he's coming to right all wrongs, to heal all of our hopes, all the things that we long for, to make wrong things right again. We believe in this truth. And we just got to be a little careful, because it is the tendency for eschatological movements to look ahead at the expense of being the kingdom now. So we got to be a little cautious that in our lens forward, we forget there's people who need to be loved now. We need to reach the community now. We need to be Jesus' hands and feet now. So, Jesus tells a banquet. Verse 16. He says, Jesus tells a story of a banquet, He says, a man once gave a great banquet and invited many. Now, this was an era, a time without smartphones, a time without Eventbrite, a time, back in the day when I was in college, maybe some of you remember this, we used Facebook events a lot. If you're a millennial, maybe you remember that. The Gen Zs have no idea what I'm talking about. But back in the day, we used to use Facebook events like quite a bit. So if you had an event like a birthday party or whatever, you're having a dinner with your friends or whatever, you would create a Facebook event. I know this feels like ancient history to some of you. You'd create a Facebook event and invite your friends. But this is an era before all that, right? This is an era before clocks, before the internet, before phones, right? It wasn't easy to invite people. So essentially what they would do is in this time period, they would send out invitations days or even weeks in advance. And they would say, hey, you're invited, kind of like a save the date, right? They would say, hey, you're invited at this date and this time, this place. We want you to be there. But you wouldn't know when the banquet would start until the day of, right? Because they didn't have clocks, they didn't have phones, they didn't have any way to communicate. You'd have to send a letter by mule and it would get to the other side of the city, right? So what they would do was they would send out runners. If this was a prominent house in first century Jerusalem, they would send out runners and they would go out and they would say, hey, it's time right now. So you guys should come because it's time. We know it's going to happen on this day, but it's time. And so the day comes in Jesus' parable, the servants are sent and they all tell the people, it's time, the food is ready, the banquet is beginning, the wedding feast starts now. But all the guests have excuses. And there have been many a sermon preached on these excuses. That's not my focus today, but they have excuses. There's one who says, hey, I bought a field and I got to go look at the ground. He's like, sorry, I can't come. The other one says, yo, I just bought some oxen. Your boy needs to go tend to the oxen. And then the third one says, I just got married. And you know what? I'm going to prioritize that. I just got married. And so they have excuses. Now, sometimes, and I have done this as well in sermons in the past. Sometimes, we jump, I think, to applying the text immediately to our lives without recognizing what's going on in the context, right? And so what Jesus is doing, he's talking about, when he's talking about these invitations, right? He's using all this metaphor of this wedding banquet, but he's using it as a metaphor to speak to the Pharisees, right? So they know what's going on beneath the surface. And what he's doing is he's bringing light to the fact that this was the invitation of God to the people of Israel. Right, all throughout the Old Testament, God is saying, he's extending his invitation through his covenants. He's saying, hey, be my people and I'll be your God. Time and time again, God is faithful when they're not faithful, when they seek after idols, when they oppress the poor. Time and time again, God says, I will be your God. I will rescue you from captivity. Would you just be my people? Come to the banquet, God says, just like he says to us. Come, but he said it to the people of Israel first. Come to the banquet. And God had this massive vision for what that banquet could be. And this is why Jesus was so angry at the temple, right, when he flipped the tables, and they have all these people, they're exchanging money, and they're profiting off of the temple. Jesus, he gets really, upset about that. And he gets upset for a really specific reason. Do you guys remember what he said? The line that he says to them, he says, my house shall be a house of prayer, but you've made it into a den of robbers. You've made it into a den of robbers. Now, that text, that little quote that he says, he's actually quoting the Old Testament. He's quoting Isaiah chapter 56. And I want to read this for you just for a second so we can get an idea of what he was saying. It says, and the foreigners, this is Isaiah 56, verses 6 and 7, and the foreigners who join themselves to the Lord to minister to him, to love the name of the Lord, and to be his servants, everyone who keeps the Sabbath and does not profane it and holds fast to my covenant, even these, I will bring to my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be accepted on my altar, for my house shall be called a house of prayer for all people. So what's going on here is that the vision for Old Testament Israel was to be a people that were organized differently than the rest of the world and the nations around them, and that their community was so compelling, their community was so attractive because they did justice differently, because they reached out to those on the fringes of society, because they had systems in place to include those on the outside, the widow, the orphan, the poor, the outsider, the foreigner. that their community would be so compelling that other people from outside of their community would say, I want to be a part of that community so bad because, wow, that's stunning. And so this vision that the people of Israel were supposed to be, were meant to be, was that they would be a house of prayer for all people. In this chapter, Isaiah 56, it's talking about all these different categories of people that you wouldn't expect to be in the people of God. He says, to the eunuchs, right? These are people who have been either sexually, they've been castrated of some kind, or they've been set aside for religious purposes, or perhaps they have some sort of disability. He says, to the eunuchs, come and be a part of the house of God. And it says time and time again, all these different categories of people. And so, he tells the parable. He gives invitations. There was a vision for what Israel was meant to be, but unfortunately, throughout the Old Testament, time and time again, they failed to live up to what God hoped and wished and dreamed for them. And so Jesus, in his parable, alludes to this to the Pharisees sitting there, almost as if to say, remember when God sent the invitation to you, but you ignored it. You couldn't care less. You rejected it. And so God, in his richness and mercy, he says, I'm going big. I'm going for the whole world. I'm going for everybody. And so Jesus, he tells a tale of invitations and excuses. And so the servant returns empty-handed. I got 3 more verses for you, and then we'll wrap up. Verse 1. In the parable, the king says to the servant, go out quickly to the streets and lanes of the city and bring in the poor and the crippled and the blind and the lame. Oh, I love this verse, right? The host of this wedding banquet, he sent invitations. He sent the save the date. A bunch of people who were on the list received the invitation, but all of them had excuses, reasons why they couldn't be there, reasons why they couldn't come to the banquet. And so the host says, okay, well, go out into the streets then. Right? Go out into the streets and lanes of the city, bring the poor and the crippled and the blind, the lame, right? In the first century Jerusalem, this would have been super common, right? Lots of poor people, crippled, blind, lame. These are people, oftentimes, we've talked about this before, in this culture and time and society, they viewed oftentimes people with ailments. If you were born crippled, you were born blind, they viewed that as God's punishment upon you. So these are people who people didn't always go out of their way to help because they just assumed, well, God is punishing you. You deserve what you got. And so he says, man, go and find those people and bring them to the banquet. And I just feel like this is God's heart for the struggling and the hurting, right? This is God's heart for the victims of the world. And we see this in Jesus all the time, right? He's the easy one to go to. But we also see it in the Father, right? We see it in the Old Testament. Prophets over and over again, the Old Testament prophets are crying out, man, you forgot about the widow and the orphan. Where are you? In fact, oftentimes, if you read Isaiah, Jeremiah, you're deep in there. Those are difficult books to read, but if you get in there, you can kind of see that a lot of the judgment that the prophets pronounce over the people of Israel are because they became the very opposite of what they were supposed to be. They were supposed to be this group of people that created liberation and life for the world, but instead they were ignoring the poor. They were marginalizing the widow. They were rejecting the foreigner. They were doing all these different things. And God says, because of these things, I'm sending judgment upon you. Right? He says, let justice roll in the streets. And so God has such a heart for the foreigner, for the outsider. He has a deep, relentless, and proactive love for anyone who has experienced othering, for anyone who has been the victim of abuse, for anyone who has felt marginalized or oppressed. This is God's heart. This is his modus operandi. He wants to bring everyone into his shalom, into his wholeness. I love John 3:16, probably one of the most famous verses ever of all time. And in John 3:16, right, many of us know if you grew up in church, it says, for God so loved the world. Now what's important about this text is if we're thinking about it theologically, this is before the cross, right? I got to take you. This is before the cross. And so, I'm getting a little excited. And so, we have to recognize this is pre-justification, pre-salvation. This is pre-Jesus dying on the cross for sin. And yet it says God loved the world, a corrupt place and corrupt system full of corrupt people with corrupt hearts. And yet God loved the world. He loved this place. And he looked down and said, I love this place and I love everyone in it. So I'm going to enact a plan to heal the whole thing. So God has a deep, deep love. So I just believe, man, to make room for one more, for us to learn how to do that as a space, as a community, as a church, a young adult ministry, man, first and foremost, this is a heart transplant. This is a receiving a new heart. This is tapping into the heart of God where we can have a tenderness and say, man, God, I want to have a heart like your heart. This is it's also a maturing, right, out of a faith that's about me. Like, what can I receive? I'm coming, every single week I'm going to church just so I can receive a thing. It's becoming less and less about me and becoming a little more missional. Becoming, man, how can I include others into the family? How can I invite others into the banquet, into the party? Right. Second verse says, and the servant said, Sir, what you have commanded has been done, and still there is room. Now what's interesting about this is there is still room after the master commands the servant to go get the poor, the crippled, and the lame, the blind. He says, go and do that. And the servant does. He's on it. In fact, he kind of preempted him. He kind of seems like he knew what the master was like. Right, a little bit like Jonah, right? You remember the Jonah story where God relents from his anger and Jonah's like, I knew it. Man, God, typical you. I knew that you would have grace and mercy. Seems like this servant is similar in that way. But this idea that there's still room, even after adding all these people, it suggests to me that in God's kingdom there is enough room for everyone. That it's not a kingdom of scarcity, but abundance. Now, this may seem obvious, but I think we often operate in church as if it is a kingdom of scarcity. We often operate as if, man, there's not enough room. Man, there's not enough. So we cloister and we stay in our communities. But it seems like there's enough room for everyone in God's kingdom. In God's economy is not an economy of scarcity, but of abundance. There's more than enough room at the table. I love this Mother Teresa quote. She says, the problem with the world is that we draw the circle of our family too small. Ooh, we draw the circle of our family too small. And if we think of Mother Teresa, we think of her life and how she lived, what she did. Man, we think of, this is what it's like to draw the circle of the family a little bit bigger. Not just the people that I know, the people that look like me, talk like me, live in my community, but to extend, to widen the walls. And I feel like this is uncomfortable to do. It causes us discomfort. Right. When I was growing up, something that my parents really valued was helping people who were going through a hard time. And time again, more than a few times, my parents invited someone who was struggling in church to live with us for a time. And I remember we helped this one lady for a while, and she lived with us. And I remember it was uncomfortable. It was really uncomfortable. I was like 12, 13. I was like, who's this lady living in my house? I didn't like it a lot of the time. But I remember over time getting to know her and discovering she was a beautiful person. And over time ended up realizing, she kind of became part of our family. She would eat at our table, she would have dinner with us, and kind of became another family member. But I remember it was very uncomfortable for us. Widening the circle of the family is uncomfortable. So I just think to make room for one another, it's a widening of the family. It's an abundance faith instead of a scarcity faith. Final verse, and then we're done. It says, and the master said to the servant, go out to the highways and hedges and compel people to come in, that my house may be filled. Now, these terms, highways and hedges, they seem a little cryptic. What are they talking about? In the original language, this is talking about contextually in this time period. Often they would have these large roads, and on these highways, this is where you would find travelers. But often, usually if they were the major highways, it would be people coming from outside, people traveling between cities, and a lot of times they would be Gentiles. These are non-Jewish people not part of the community. They're traveling back and forth. And so these are travelers right on the highway, almost certainly Gentiles. But then the hedges, that's kind of a bit of a weird word. But essentially during this time period, if you owned a vineyard or a farm or something, what they would do is they would create these hedges around to be like kind of borders, kind of like how we have fences today. And these hedges would often have thorns intentionally put in them or something like that so animals couldn't come in and eat the food. And it was usually usually pretty high so that they couldn't jump or something like that. But often people who owned these places, they would have workers who would work and they would tend the fields, they would tend the hedges, and sometimes they'd even sleep in or among these hedges just for protection from the weather, from the elements. And again, these are often Gentiles. These are people who, maybe they would prop up a piece of wood against this hedge or something and sleep under it. But these are people who didn't really have anywhere to go. These are foreigners, refugees, you could say, so to speak. And so what Jesus is saying in this parable, what we have the master saying is, hey, go out to those places, find the foreigners, find the outsiders, find the people who are refugees, who are looking for a home, find them, bring them in, invite them to the banquet. And I just feel like for us, it means a couple things. First, if you or someone you know is uncomfortable with, or you've had negative experience with, or maybe you've never been to, or perhaps you've been hurt by church, I need to say, we want you here. We really, really do. And if you know someone who's had that experience, a little bit of church trauma, a little bit of church hurt, I definitely do. I have a lot of friends who have either grew up in the church, they've left, or they're on the outside. They've experienced deep hurt, deep pain from church, from religious spaces. If you know people like that, if you are a person like that, man, I just want to say this is a place for you. We want to create a space. We want to create a church environment where you can feel safe and you can feel welcome to be here. And that's really, really important, and it's really, really, at times, probably going to be uncomfortable for us as a church to have people in the space who are still trying to figure it out. But that's okay. If that's you, man, I'm so glad you're here, because that has been me a lot in my life. It also means that church should maybe look a little unconventional. Should maybe look a little unconventional and even a little uncomfortable if we're on mission for the kingdom. It should be an uncomfortable space. We shouldn't know everybody in the room. There should be new faces, right? And maybe some of them, they don't smell the same or dress the same or look the same. It should be a space where, man, there's new people coming in, we're meeting new people. Wow, shake a hand. Man, we're so glad you're here. Right, but this is it creates a little tension and causes us to stretch, causes us to grow, causes us to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. I felt like that was important to say just because we want to be that kind of young adult ministry. We want to be that kind of church here at Keene. I know Pastor Michael and I both share that heart for that. I want to close telling you about this really cool ministry called People of the Second Chance, made by a guy named Mike Foster. About 15 years ago, him and some folk, they created this ministry where they throw parties for people who have been incarcerated, called prodigal parties. Kind of sick. I think I have a picture of it. Yeah. This is a picture here for a guy named Tyrell. They throwed this big party for him. And he had just gotten out of prison, and they threw this massive just celebration for him, just to celebrate him coming out of prison and going from one stage of his life into a new season. And I just felt like this painted such a good picture for what church could be. Like, what if church was like this? And I know that some of you have seen and you've been involved in churches that are like this. And I think Keene is a church that is like this, where we have celebrations. Every single time we have a baptism up here, right, this is the moment that's happening. But I guess I just felt like it painted an awesome image of what we could continue to strive to be, a place that celebrates death to life. Where we reach out, we're intentional, we're proactive, we're not passive, but we're saying, hey, would you come to the party? Would you join us? And I think I have a quote by Mike Foster. He says, he's got a good word in his book. I think I have it up here. Perhaps. It might be on, here it is. He says, I'm going to come down so I can read it. He says, second chancers must find the party. We must be the party. We must create opportunities to celebrate and become the proverbial hostess with the mostest. Isn't that a great quote? He says, man, we have to find opportunities to be the party for people. What could that look like if we tried to be the party for people, to be the celebration? And so that's my hope, that's my dream, that's my heart for you and for me and for us, that we could lean into, perhaps, and be the hostess with the mostest. Amen.